A lot of people don't know this, but Russia is already broken apart. Now, technically speaking, it isn't broken apart, but it's basically falling apart. And if you look at all the different polls and surveys and studies being conducted right now, Russia is going to break apart into 5 separate countries. So let's talk about what those 5 new countries will look like. But before we do, as always, if you appreciate videos like this, it does help out tremendously if you hit that like button or subscribe. It helps out the channel so much, and I can keep making more videos just like this one. So thank you guys so much for doing that, and let's begin. Okay, first things first, why will Russia break apart? Well, it's pretty simple, really. Over the past few centuries, there have been many attempts to unify the thousands of tribes, ethnicities, and nations that have lived within Russia's borders. Obviously, they haven't been successful because if they were, then we wouldn't be talking about this today. The issue with Russia is that it's a massive country that stretches from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, and it encompasses more than 63 million square miles of land, which makes it the largest country on Earth. However, despite its massive size, only about half of Russians live within 300 miles of the country's geographic center. In fact, almost 2/3 of all Russians live within 600 miles of one of the country's seas, largely on the European side of the country. This is a problem because while they are ethnically Russian, they don't share much culture or history with the rest of the country. You see, Russia is home to 190 ethnic groups, including 34 that have more than 100,000 speakers. So you can imagine how difficult it would be to unify all of them under one banner. Even worse, most of the regions within Russia don't even identify as Russian. For example, the North Caucasus region of the country, which is made up of places like Chechnya and Ingushetia and Kabardino-Balkaria, Dagestan, etc. These regions have their own languages and cultures and histories, and they just don't feel Russian. As one analyst explained, the Russian state has not succeeded in establishing a strong sense of national identity. There is little loyalty to the Russian state among many of the non-Russian minorities and ethnic Russians outside of the central regions. Basically, the analysts are saying that the guy in St. Petersburg doesn't have much in common with the guy in Vladivostok. They aren't the same, even though they both identify as Russian. In fact, Russia is so diverse that some scholars actually argue that it shouldn't even be considered a nation-state at all. The differences between the various regions within Russia are so great that it may be more accurate to think of Russia as a multinational or multi-ethnic state instead. Unfortunately, that means that when you're trying to govern a place like Russia, you have to take into account the unique needs and interests of each region. And honestly, it's impossible to do that from Moscow. To make matters worse, while Russia may be a nuclear power and one of the world's largest countries, it's far from being a superpower. The average wage in Russia is just $650 per month, and over the past decade, incomes have stagnated and living standards have fallen. Now, compare that to the United States, where the average income is about $2,800 per month, or Germany, where it's about $1,700 per month. When you consider that Russia's GDP is less than that of Italy's, it becomes clear that the country's leaders have not been able to provide their citizens with the quality of life that they were promised. And it's not because the Russian people aren't intelligent enough or hard-working enough. It's because they are spread out across such a huge area that it's difficult to provide them with the services they need to thrive. Just look at the infrastructure. The majority of Russia's major cities are located on the European side of the country, with 75% of the population living within 600 miles of one of the country's European seas. Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, Yekaterinburg, and Kazan. On the other hand, the country's vast eastern regions remain sparsely populated and underdeveloped. Vladivostok, Russia's largest city on the Pacific coast, only has a population of around 650,000 people, which is smaller than that of Oklahoma City. With such limited population centers, it's incredibly expensive to build the infrastructure necessary to connect them. That's why the Trans-Siberian Railway, which was built in the early 20th century, remains the only way to efficiently transport goods and people across the country. And it's not enough anymore. As time goes on, the disparity between the wealthier European side of the country and the poorer Asian side will only become more pronounced. And that will cause even more unrest. And unfortunately, that unrest is already beginning to boil over. We saw a large-scale protest in Chechnya a few weeks ago. after a group of armed men attacked a mosque during evening prayers, killing 4 people and injuring many others. The incident sparked outrage across the country, and thousands took to the streets to demand justice. In fact, a similar incident happened in Dagestan last year. Tensions have been high in the region ever since Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, and the ongoing war in Ukraine has only made things worse. Many people in Dagestan and Chechnya are ethnicities or Muslim, and they've been feeling increasingly marginalized by the Russian state. Things came to a head in September, when President Vladimir Putin announced a partial mobilization of the country's reservists to fight in Ukraine. That move was seen as an attempt to further tighten his control over the country, and it sparked widespread anger and resentment among many of the non-Russian ethnicities within Russia. Now, Dagestan in particular has been a hotbed of Islamic militancy for years, and it was the scene of 2 separate revolts in 2022 alone. Many of the young men who have been killed in the fighting in Ukraine are from this region, and that has only added to the growing sense of disaffection. At the end of the day, people in these regions do want to really feel connected to the Russian state, and they do want to go to war to defend it. And that's a huge problem for Putin. You see, Putin has long tried to paint the conflict in Ukraine as one to defend the Russian motherland and its people. He's called it a patriotic duty and said that all Russians must unite to defend their country. But people in places like Dagestan and Chechnya aren't having it. They don't want to defend Russia, and they don't want to be part of it. In fact, some of them are calling for independence. It might sound crazy, but there's actually some serious support for it. A recent poll found that 45% of Dagestanis wanted independence from Russia, while another 30% wanted to join the North Caucasus Federal District. The North Caucasus Federal District is a group of 8 Muslim-majority regions in southern Russia that have a lot of autonomy from the central government. And honestly, that's probably the best-case scenario for Russia. If the people in these regions are unhappy being ruled from Moscow, then give them more autonomy and let them govern themselves. But a lot of people don't want that. They want complete independence. In fact, you have people like Umarov, the former head of the Chechen Republic, who is now calling for an independent state in the North Caucasus. He wants to break away from Russia and create his own country, and he has a lot of support. Umarov's rhetoric has struck a chord with many of the young people in the region who feel alienated from both the Russian state and society, and that's a dangerous development for Putin. If the people of Dagestan and Chechnya feel that they have no other choice but to break away from Russia, then he will have lost control of the country, and the country will indeed break apart into 5 separate countries. First, you have the country that we know as Russia today. This country would encompass the area that is currently home to about 100 million Russians, mostly ethnically Russian people. Then you have the country of Chechnya, which would be made up of the current Chechen Republic, Ingushetia, Kabardino-Balkaria, North Ossetia, and Karachay-Cherkessia. This country would be home to about 15 million people, mostly Muslims. Then you have the country of Dagestan, which would be made up of the current Republic of Dagestan, Kaliningrad Oblast, and the Astrakhan Oblast. This country would also be Muslim and have a population of about 10 million. Next you have Tatarstan, which would include the current Republic of Tatarstan, Huvashia Mariel, Admurtia, and Perm Krai. This country would be predominantly Christian and have a population of about 10 million. Finally, you have the country of Siberia, which would include the current Krasnoyarsk Krai, Irkutsk Oblast, Kemerovo Oblast, Tomsk Oblast, Omsk Oblast, Novosibirsk Oblast, and Altai Krai. This country would have a population of about 8 million and would be mostly Christian. Now, will Russia break apart like this? Most likely not. This is just the most likely outcome. There's a chance that it breaks apart into more pieces, and there's also a chance that it doesn't break apart at all. But honestly, it seems like the unrest among the various ethnic groups within Russia is just too great to ignore. And if Putin can't find a way to bring the country together, then it will eventually break apart. Thank you guys for watching.